The heat pressed down on the tarmac like a living thing. Waves of it shimmered off the pavement, warping the air around rows of polished aircraft. Their bodies gleamed under the harsh sun-silver skins, spotless insignias sharp casting precise shadows like they belonged in a movie shoot. Ground crews in fresh vests moved in fluid coordination headsets, snug sunglasses mirrored. Everything was clean, deliberate, and just noisy enough to feel important. Beyond them, the jets waited like proud athletes before a race perfect and posed. Near the edge of the lot where the shade stopped and the concrete cracked with age stood a woman no one seemed to notice. Her boots were scuffed. The laces had long since lost their color. Her shirt, olive and faded, was rolled at the sleeves, tucked into dusty pants creased hard at the knees. She wasn't looking for attention. Her face was calm skin darkened by sun hair pulled into a low knot. A pair of gloves hung from her belt, swinging slightly in the breeze. Behind her, the aircraft she stood beside looked like something from another era. Its skin was matte gray, dull with grit, its body broad and squared off like it had nothing left to prove. No one stood near it. No crew checked its panels. No camera pointed that way. The other planes had logos, flare names stenciled bold. This one had numbers partly faded and history etched into every dent. The woman didn't move. She didn't scan the horizon, didn't adjust her stance. She simply stood, hands resting at her sides, eyes fixed forward. She wasn't part of the polished scene. She was something older, simpler, heavier. Around her, laughter rose from a nearby group of pilots gathered under a shaded tent. Their accents danced across the heat as someone passed out bottled water and compliments. Nobody looked her way. Nobody asked if she was flying. But she was ready. You could see it in the quiet stillness of her frame, in the way her foot tapped once against the landing gear like a pilot checking rhythm. No clipboard listed her name. No voice called her in. Yet she stood beside her aircraft like it might lift off at any second. And when it did, no one would see it coming. Section 1. The Quiet One. Callie was never one for noise. She didn't chase applause or wear credentials like armor. Her strength was quiet, built from years of doing the hard work that never made headlines. She grew up on the edge of a forgotten airfield in South Texas. Her mother flew aid missions during storm seasons, and when Callie was old enough to reach the pedals, she sat right seat in an old twin prop. That cockpit was where she first learned the sky wasn't about freedom, but purpose. The hangars were rusted and the runways cracked, but to Callie, those long stretches of gravel and heat felt like home. She'd spend hours with a wrench and hand grease under her nails, following her mom's voice through engine repairs and pre-flight checks. She didn't attend a fancy flight academy. Most of her hours were logged in cargo flights no one tracked, landing on strips half-eaten by jungle or frozen in the Alaskan dark. Her name never made any boardroom list. Her record wasn't pretty, but it never needed to be. Juliet 4 had been a broken shell when she found it. Just a frame sold off cheap in a federal clearance auction, missing key parts and buried in dust. Most people would have seen scrap metal. Callie saw potential. Over the next 3 years, she rebuilt it by hand. Every panel, every wire, every system. She traded manuals for tools, bartered for parts across bases. The hydraulics she rewired herself one slow weekend at a time. She studied terrain maps late at night, sketching in wind drift and load angles with a pencil and ruler. While others schmoozed with donors and talked performance metrics, she memorized weather patterns and isolated approach vectors. She knew how to fly into places GPS barely recognized. On paper, her resume looked like patchwork. Too many stops. Not enough promotion. But the people who needed help never cared about that. They only cared that the supplies got through. At the base, she wasn't listed as a lead pilot. They called her logistics. That meant she could load and fix things but not fly them. Still, she kept her own logbook, a worn blue notebook taped inside Juliet 4's cockpit wall. She wrote down every hour she flew, even if no one saw it. Every landing, every drop, every storm she threaded between mountain gaps where bigger planes wouldn't dare try. Her initials, CR, marked every page. She didn't dress like the others. No designer vests, no name tags pinned with gold trim. Her boots were work-worn, her hands calloused. She kept her gloves looped at her belt, not tucked away in some polished flight case. Callie wasn't unimpressive. She just didn't make a show of things. When she walked the flight line, she walked with purpose, not performance. She carried weight like it belonged to her. Most people at the base didn't bother to learn her name. They passed her like she was part of the background, some ground tech who'd wandered too close. But Micah knew. Tessa knew. A few others quiet like her saw it too. She didn't push. She didn't try to prove anything. She let the work speak, let the metal and movement and maps tell the story. She believed in being ready, even if no one asked her to be. Her kind of preparation wasn't flashy. It was patient, built in silence, shaped in long hours when no one else was watching. Her plane wasn't fast, but it was reliable. Her hands weren't soft, but they were steady. She kept Juliet 4 fueled even when it sat on the far edge of the tarmac for days. She ran checks weekly. She traced every pressure line and made notes when the readings shifted by even a fraction. Not because someone told her to, because that's what it meant to be prepared. In a world chasing speed and spotlight, Callie moved slow and stayed grounded. She didn't argue for a seat at the table. She simply made sure she was the one person who could act when the others froze. There was no announcement, no welcome banner, no team meeting to tell her she mattered. But none of that changed the way she worked, because deep down, she already knew the truth. When the moment came, she wouldn't have to ask for permission. She'd already be ready. Section 2. Where rank matters more than readiness. 2.1. The polished ones. The morning briefing looked more like a media launch than an operations meeting. A folding table was set up under a branded canopy, banner's crisp logo centered. Cameras lingered just out of frame, waiting for something polished to happen. Julian Harrow stood at the center, sleeves rolled to the elbows of a perfect white shirt. His watch gleamed in the sun, and his sunglasses rested on top of his head like a crown. He spoke in quick, clear bursts, tossing glances to screens and waiting for nods like cues from a director. He had the kind of confidence that filled space. People leaned toward him when he talked, even if he wasn't saying much. Everything about him suggested he'd never once been told no. Beside him, Valerie Knox scrolled through her tablet with one hand and adjusted her hair with the other. Her heels didn't sink into the tarmac. Her aviators mirrored everything but herself. She spoke like a voiceover, smooth and PR perfect. Every angle of the scene had been planned. Crews in matching vests held coffee cups with the logo turned out. Pilots from other countries mingled, laughing at just the right volume, camera ready at all times. Even the hangar doors behind them were positioned for dramatic background symmetry. Derek Solis leaned against the wing of his jet like it was a sports car in a showroom. His vest was unzipped just enough to show the brand stitched inside. His smile worked on a 10-second loop, all teeth and charm and media-trained humility. No one was flying yet, but the cameras were already rolling. Someone handed out water bottles with custom labels. A photographer squatted low for a shot of a polished wing under the morning sun. A few folks adjusted their posture as the light changed. Callie stood about 20 yards away. Her shadow fell long across the concrete cast from the wing of Juliet 4. No spotlight, no nod, no invitation to join. Just silence between her and the show. She wasn't part of the pageantry. Her sleeves were rolled but not ironed. Her boots had dirt in the treads. No one turned when she walked by. If they noticed her at all, they probably assumed she was maintenance. The contrast wasn't just visual. It was loudness versus focus, decoration versus discipline, and no one seemed to think it strange. It was a place where looking the part mattered more than knowing the route, where being seen doing something sometimes passed for doing it well, and where someone like Callie could stand ready while no one asked the right question. She didn't fidget. She didn't interrupt. She waited quietly, watching the group in front of the cameras. The air smelled like sunscreen and ego. Juliet 4 sat quiet behind her, forgotten, but fueled. Nobody pointed, nobody whispered. They just didn't see her at all, and that somehow felt louder than if they had. 2.2. Her place on the side. Callie waited until there was a pause in the conversation. She stepped forward slowly, holding a folded manifest in one hand. Her boots left small puffs of dust on the concrete as she walked toward the circle. Julian didn't look at her. He kept scanning the flight charts on the table, his voice steady as he gave instructions. She stopped just at the edge of the group, close enough to be heard, but far enough not to intrude. She cleared her throat softly and raised the sheet. Her voice was quiet, measured, offering an update on Juliet 4's availability. Julian cut her off without turning his head, told the support crew to hold back, that they were reviewing assets. A few people smirked. Someone chuckled from the front row. Valerie's voice came over the speaker system, smiling in tone but sharp underneath, reminding logistics not to approach unless called. The sound of laughter wasn't loud, but it hit hard. Callie stood still as Derek nodded toward her, making a joke about museum pieces and pointing at Juliet 4. A tech snapped a photo with his phone and laughed behind his screen. Valerie tapped her tablet, and within seconds a post went up. The image was Callie near her old aircraft, the caption a stab dressed as humor. Something about interns and missions and knowing your place. Callie didn't flinch. She didn't defend herself or explain. She looked at the manifest once more, then folded it and slipped it back into her pocket. She stepped away from the group slowly, her eyes on the runway. No one stopped her. No one looked ashamed. The group turned back to their briefing like nothing had happened. Julian pulled up another weather report. Valerie tilted her sunglasses just right for the camera. Behind them, Juliet 4 sat quiet heat, rising around its frame. Callie returned to it, her footsteps, even her face, unreadable. The gloves at her belt shifted gently, with each step swaying like the only thing still listening. Section 3. The crisis. No one could handle. 3.1. The earthquake. The first buzz came through Tessa's phone. A short vibration. No context. Just a code from the regional center, followed by a warning tag. Seconds later, Julian's tablet lit up with the same alert. Then the radios came alive. All at once. Every screen on base flickered with seismic data. A second quake had hit just off the eastern trench, stronger than the last and closer to the island's only functioning port. The reports kept stacking. The port was gone. The supply barge had drifted. The helipad used for evac was cracked open, bent metal and exposed wiring curling like paper. One of the landing zones had completely collapsed into the sea. No one at the base moved for a second. Then the panic began. Maps were pulled up, flight paths rerun, weather models redrawn by hands not as steady as before. Julian started pacing. His voice climbed with every new restriction called in. No landing clearance. Too much debris. No way to drop supplies safely from the size of aircraft they had on standby. Derek threw on his jacket and scanned the charts with growing frustration. His jet was too big. There was nowhere stable enough to touch down. He shrugged and called for someone to begin breaking down the cargo he'd loaded earlier. Valerie kept updating the press sheet. Her lines never wavered, but her eyes moved fast. She suggested they say the mission was being repositioned to better support future deployment. She left out the word delay. The sky darkened with gathering clouds. A wind pushed in from the south, heavy and low. Pilots retreated into simulation bays. Ground crew stood idle beside crates that were now going nowhere. From the far end of the ramp, Callie watched without blinking. The terminal in her hand showed the same map. She didn't speak. She just looked at the screen, then at Juliet 4, then at the sky. No one asked for her input. No one turned her way. Everyone was talking. Everyone had something to say, but nothing to actually do. Juliet 4 sat steady. Its fuel line disconnected its wing, stretching a shadow across the gravel. Callie didn't move. Not yet. She just observed what they hadn't realized. They were grounded. Every one of them. Not by policy, not by choice, but by reality. The island was cut off and no one had a plan that could reach it. The longer they argued, the more the confidence faded. The faster they tried to talk, the slower their decisions became. For the first time since arriving, the base felt small. 3.2. The silence of capability. The command tent was full of voices layered on top of each other. Every screen blinked with alerts. Everyone was trying to be louder than the situation. Julian barked updates into his headset, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. Valerie hovered behind him, typing new phrasing into the press draft. Derek leaned over a monitor, annoyed more than worried. Callie walked in quietly, gloves in one hand, tablet in the other. She stood at the edge of the table, waited for a pause that never came, then spoke anyway. Her voice was low, but it carried. She'd mapped a route. She could make it to the North Plateau with a 30-meter margin. Juliet 4 was ready. Julian didn't look up. He just waved her off. Said she wasn't credentialed. Reminded her she wasn't even listed for flight leadership. His tone made it sound like he was saving her from herself. Valerie stepped in, laughing under her breath. Said it wasn't the time for museum pieces or rogue stunts. She looked at Callie like she'd interrupted something important, which in their eyes she had. Callie didn't push. She nodded, once turned away and walked out without another word. The doors closed behind her with barely a sound. Tessa caught up to her behind the stacks of grounded crates. She didn't say much, just slipped a folded paper into Callie's hand and told her to use it. Override codes from a previous mission never turned in. Callie didn't hesitate. She tucked the paper into her jacket and kept moving. She didn't ask why Tessa trusted her. She already knew. Micah was already at Juliet 4. He didn't ask questions, just handed her a checklist and started loading water crates. One by one, they secured everything in place. The straps were checked. The chute packs were cinched. The rear ramp creaked shut with a heavy sigh. Callie ran her fingers along the control panel, checking for anything missed. The sun glinted off the aircraft's nose, dull but steady. It looked like it had been waiting for this exact moment. Across the base, people were still arguing, still rewriting reports, still posing near logos. But at the far end of the tarmac, something else was moving. Something real. No one announced her name. No team followed her steps. Just one pilot, one loadmaster, and a machine built from patience. And it was enough. Section 4. The flight that wasn't allowed. The air felt heavier as Juliet 4 began to roll. The engines roared slow and low, building from a deep hum into something solid. Callie sat in the cockpit, eyes forward, every movement precise. No one had given her clearance. No green light flashed, but she moved like someone who didn't need permission, like she already knew she was the only one left who could act. Micah stood back from the loading ramp, headset around his neck, arms crossed. His gaze never left the aircraft. Tessa watched from behind the fuel bay, her hand resting against the wall like it anchored her to the ground. Down by the press tent, Valerie froze in place mid-pose. Julian turned too late, the mic still in his hand, halfway through a sentence about long-term planning. Derek didn't move. He stood by his grounded jet mouth, open but silent. Juliet 4 gained speed, its wheels cutting through heat shimmer, its wings catching the first push of lift. The nose tipped upward, the body followed, and then she was airborne. The old aircraft rose slowly but steady, rising through the noise that had once tried to bury it. Her shadow pulled ahead across the tarmac, long and certain, stretching over the lines of new jets still parked in silence. Inside the command tent, someone said her name out loud for the first time. A whisper. It didn't travel far, but it was enough to break the spell. The base fell quiet. Callie adjusted altitude, set her heading, and flipped the comm switch to open broadcast. Her voice came through steady and low, requesting departure clearance as if the decision hadn't already been made. No reply came. Just static. Just breath. Then Julian's voice cut through, sharp and too loud, ordering her to return. He said it 3 times. Each one carried less weight than the last. She switched the channel to silent. Far below, someone had started filming. A ground crew member, hands shaking slightly, caught the plane disappearing into the clouds. The shot was grainy, unplanned, but it would be the first video to hit the feed. Minutes passed. No word. No contact. Just a tracker dot blinking on a screen. Then another signal came through, this time from the island. A technician on the North Plateau had rotated the dish by hand. The feed came in rough at first, but then it cleared. The image was shaky. A wide hilltop. Children gathered near the edge of a cracked building. Elderly people standing under makeshift tarps, all looking up. Juliet 4 appeared over the ridge like a shadow moving against the sun, her wings steady, her body low. The crates began to fall. Each one marked in chalk. Water, food, medical. The parachutes opened one after another, catching the wind like blooming sails. They floated down in clean arcs, every drop landing within reach of the people below. The crowd didn't move at first. Then one child ran toward the first crate. Others followed. Some clapped. One raised his arms to the sky. Someone else cried. Inside the base, every screen now streamed the same video. No one had planned the moment, but no one looked away. They watched as the last crate landed perfectly spaced among the others, the last chute drifting like a flag. Juliet 4 circled once low and deliberate. No stunt, no flourish. Just a final sweep to confirm. And then the radio cracked open again. Nico's voice came through from the island. He sounded breathless, tired, alive. He listed the supplies, confirmed the impact zones. No injuries, no losses. Then his voice broke. He said to tell her we saw her wings. In the press tent, Valerie's tablet buzzed non-stop with alerts. She didn't reach for it. Julian stood motionless beside the comm desk, one hand over his mouth. Derek lowered his phone, eyes locked on the screen. Outside, a few crew members had gathered near the edge of the tarmac. They didn't speak, just watched the monitors, watched the sky. The internet did the rest. The live stream was clipped, reposted, captioned, a relic in the sky. No clearance, no mistake. Threads filled with the flight path, the crate specs, the line Nico said. Callie kept flying. She didn't respond to the chatter. She adjusted for wind, monitored her levels, set a return course. Her hands never shook. Somewhere over the ocean, she leaned forward, removed her headset, and placed it gently on the dash. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just breathed. Juliet 4 cruised steady back toward the base. No fanfare. No welcome message. But for the first time since she'd arrived, the silence around her wasn't emptiness. It was respect. Quiet, overdue respect. She had done the impossible. She had done it without a title, without backup, without fanfare, and she had done it perfectly. At the edge of the island, a boy stood still, holding a sealed water pack to his chest. His other hand reached up, waving toward the shrinking shape in the sky. His smile was small but certain. Behind him, the crates lined the hill like a promise delivered. And across the world for a moment, everything stopped just to watch her fly. Section 5. When the Mockery Fell Silent. 5.1. The Aftermath. The command tent stayed quiet long after the feed ended. Screens kept replaying the drop, looping the moment Juliet 4 swept low over the hills. No one said anything. Valerie tapped through her notifications, then locked her tablet. She opened her profile, deleted the latest post, then the one before that. A few clicks later, all her captions were gone. No one told her to. She just did it. Her fingers moved faster than her eyes, as if it hurt to read the words she'd written earlier. Julian stood near the corner of the room. He wasn't speaking anymore. The mic on his collar hung loose, forgotten. Later that evening, a new name appeared on the flight rotation roster. Julian's line was missing. In its place was a signature no one recognized. Derek sat on the low edge of the platform near the hangar, elbows on his knees, head bowed. His vest lay beside him, unzipped. For the first time all week, he didn't have anything to say. People still moved around the base, but their steps felt different, lighter, slower. They didn't avoid eye contact, but they didn't linger either. Callie's name didn't come up. No one had the nerve to say it out loud, not yet. But they all knew. There was no official announcement, no press release, just the quiet ripple of understanding that spread from tent to tent. The air had shifted. The noise that once filled every corner had thinned. Something had cracked open and everyone felt it. A few crew members stood together by the monitors, watching the island feed run again. This time no one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. They just watched that gray aircraft glide through the frame. Watched the crates land in clean, perfect arcs. Watched the people on the ground run to meet them. It was too late for apologies, too quiet for praise, but the message had landed. The silence said enough. 5.2. Her return. Juliet 4 touched down under a late sun, the tires brushing against the concrete with a quiet thump. Dust lifted in slow swirls behind her. The engines faded to a hum, then silence. Callie powered down the panel one switch at a time. The cockpit dimmed as she reached for her gloves and slipped them through her belt. She didn't rush. Outside, the runway stretched wide and still. No one waited at the edge, no applause, no welcome. She opened the hatch and climbed down. Her boots struck the stairs with a soft echo, each step steady. The breeze pulled lightly at her shirt. Tessa stood near the fuel station. She didn't wave or call out, just waited with her arms at her sides. Callie walked toward her. Not quickly, just with the same pace she always had, like nothing had changed, like everything had. Tessa stepped forward as they met. Her voice was low, almost unsure. Geneva called. Callie gave a small nod. Not surprised, not moved, just noted. She kept walking, past the tents, past the people who turned to look but said nothing. Their eyes followed her, but their mouths stayed closed. Derek stood near, his grounded jet hands in his pockets. He didn't speak. His gaze dropped as she passed. Valerie didn't appear. Her station sat empty, screens turned to black. No one asked where she had gone. Julian wasn't on the field. The tower windows were open but quiet. Inside, the new officer watched without expression. Callie made no comment. She didn't change her path. She walked with purpose toward the hangar at the far end of the line. One crew member, barely 20, raised a hand in a slow, hesitant salute. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. Callie returned it with a slight nod. Her face was calm, her eyes steady. She reached the hangar and stepped inside. The shadow swallowed her figure as Juliet 4 disappeared behind the sliding doors. The space closed again. Still. Familiar. She didn't turn back. There was nothing left to prove. The hangar was quiet again, lit only by a few dim overhead bulbs that hummed in the silence. Juliet 4 sat parked near the far wall, her surface streaked with salt and dust. The echoes of the day had faded into a calm too full to touch. Callie sat on a metal crate beside the wing, her gloves in her lap. She moved slowly, wiping them down with a clean cloth, one palm at a time. There was no urgency left in her motions, only care. She checked each seam, smoothing out creases from the long flight. The cloth brushed in gentle circles across the leather, then folded neatly over her fingers. It was a rhythm she had done 100 times, but never like this. No voices carried through the door. No orders came from the radio. The base had shifted into some other gear, one without her in its chain of command. She leaned back slightly, letting her shoulder rest against the metal behind her. Her eyes tracked the overhead beams, the bolts that framed them. For once, her thoughts weren't racing ahead of her. The aircraft loomed behind her like something living, its weight still settling after flight heat rising in waves from the panels. She reached back, palm pressed flat against the fuselage. She didn't smile. She didn't sigh. She just sat with it, letting the stillness say what needed saying. Across the hangar door, a young logistics girl stepped into view. Her uniform was stiff, new creases still holding their shape. She stopped just inside the shadow, eyes scanning the space. She spotted Callie but didn't speak. Whatever she had come to do no longer seemed important. After a moment, she turned and left without a word. Callie watched her go, then looked back to the plane. She stood and stepped toward the cockpit. Her boots made a dull sound on the metal stairs. Inside, the dash lights glowed a soft green. She flipped one switch, then another, checking systems out of habit. No checklist in hand. Just memory. Her logbook waited on the dash, its corners curled, spine worn soft. She opened it to the last filled page where her last entry ended in a clear, steady line. Her pen moved with quiet certainty as she wrote the next. She paused when it was done, not to reread it, but to let the ink settle. Then she set the pen down and ran her hand once more across the surface of the panel. There were no claps, no photos, no press, just her and the plane and the words that belonged only to them. She closed the logbook, gently held it a moment longer, then tucked it into its place beside the throttle. Her breath was steady, her shoulders light. She sat in the pilot's chair one last time that night. The cockpit was warm from memory, not from heat, and the silence around her was full. No rank, no clearance, just flew. The photo that reached the world first was not official. It wasn't taken by a reporter or filtered through any media team. It was shot by a relief worker using an old phone with cracked glass. In the frame, a boy stands barefoot in the dust. One hand clutches a sealed water packet still cold enough to bead. His other hand is raised, fingers outstretched in a quiet wave. Behind him, Juliet 4 fades into a sky streaked with late sun. Its wings tilt slightly mid-climb, the tail already disappearing into cloud. There is no smoke, no blur, just shape and motion caught between two worlds. That image traveled faster than any press release ever could. It wasn't labeled or edited. It didn't need a caption. People shared it in silence. No slogans, no arguments, just the feeling that it meant something. Within hours, it had circled the globe. On screens in airports, on feeds of pilots, in quiet corners where aid workers sat with heavy hearts. No one tagged Callie. They didn't have to. There were no interviews, no podiums, no victory statements. She didn't appear on late-night panels or cover spreads. Instead, her story moved through quiet spaces. Emails between crews, notes passed across bases, messages left in the margins of flight logs. Back on the island, they built a temporary shelter from the dropped crates. On one wall, they taped the photo of the boy waving. It stayed there untouched. At the base, the spot where Juliet 4 had launched was never reassigned. For days, no aircraft was parked there, just a shadow that stayed a little longer each afternoon. Someone eventually found her logbook entry. It had been copied in pencil, tucked in the briefing room beside the weather charts. No rank, no clearance, just flew. But beneath that, another line had been added in the same neat handwriting. The words were small but steady, pressed into the paper like they were meant to last. Sometimes the ones we overlook are the ones already carrying the weight.